This ugly hair doesn't belong here. Evelyn's voice slices through the stunned silence, her scissors snipping viciously at Kayla's long beaded braids. The polished oak floor of the Caldwell mansion catches the falling strands, each one a piece of Kayla's pride, her heritage severed. Before a gasping crowd, rain drums the windows, amplifying the cruelty of the moment. As Kayla stands frozen, her eyes wide with shock yet blazing with defiance. Why would a mother-in-law commit such a heartless act? What secrets does Kayla hold that could unravel this Southern dynasty's pride? Subscribe now to join the journey and drop a comment. Where are you listening from? And what time is it? What do you think happens next? Will Kayla crumble or will her truth shake? The foundations of this family. Stay with us to find out. You won't want to miss a single word. The air in the Caldwell mansion's kitchen hung heavy with the scent of sizzling onions and jasmine drifting through the open windows, a fragile truce against the humid weight of the savannah. Summer. Kayla stood at the stove, her wooden spoon carving slow circles through a pot of okra to the rhythmic clink of beads in her long braided hair, a quiet rebellion against the silence. At 25, she moved with a dancer's grace, her rebellion against the silence. Apron dusted, with flower sweat beading on her dark skin. The stew bubbled its earthy warmth. A piece of her grandmother's gula legacy, a tether to a past she clung to amidst the polished oak counters and crystal chandeliers of this alien world. Today was the Caldwell family reunion, and Kayla was determined to prove she belonged not just to Sebastian, her husband, but to his lineage, a Southern dynasty that wore its pride like armor. She hummed a low spiritual, the note soft as the rain, pattering on the roof, grounding her nerves. Her braids swayed, each bead a glint of defiance, a declaration of who she was in a house that seemed to whisper she wasn't enough. Sebastian's text from earlier glowed in her mind. You've got this love. But he was in Atlanta delayed by a work crisis, leaving her to face his family alone. The thought tightened her chest, but she pushed it down, arranging magnolia centerpieces with hands that refused to tremble. She'd make this day perfect. For him, for them. The kitchen door swung open and Evelyn's heels clicked like a metronome on the hardwood. Kayla's spine stiffened, but she didn't turn, focusing on the stew's simmer. Evelyn Caldwell, the matriarch, was a vision of controlled elegance. 60-second, sharp blue eyes. Her silver blonde hair pulled into a severe shiny. Her rosewater perfume cut through the kitchen's warmth, a cloying intrusion. She paused, inspecting the platters of shrimp and grits with a curled lip. These dishes are bold, she said, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. Perhaps too much for our guests. Kayla forced a smile, her spoon never faltering. I thought they'd appreciate a taste of Savannah's roots. Evelyn, something from my family's traditions. The words were steady, but her heart thudded, sensing the weight behind Evelyn's gaze. Not on the food, but on her. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, raking over Kayla's braids, the beads catching the E, light like tiny stars. Your hair is quite a statement, she said, her tone icy. This is a Caldwell event. Dear subtlety matters. The words landed like a slap, their meaning clear. You don't belong. Kayla's fingers tightened on the spoon, but she kept her voice even. It's just my hair, Evelyn, part of who I am. Evelyn's lips thinned a flicker of disdain, crossing her face before she turned her heels, retreating. Kayla exhaled the air, suddenly lighter, but the sting lingered. She'd felt those eyes before. 2 years of marriage, countless dinners where Evelyn's smiles never reached her eyes, where every dish Kayla cooked was interesting but never praised. The Caldwells were old money, their lineage, a tapestry of plantation, wealth, and political clout, and to Evelyn, Kayla was a tear in that fabric. A black woman with no pedigree to match their name. The front door chimed and voices spilled into the foyer early guests. Their laughter a stark contrast to the kitchen's tension. Kayla smoothed her apron, carrying a tray of cornbread to the dining hall. Clara, a cousin in her, 32nd arrived first. Her smile, tentative. Smells amazing, Kayla, she said. But her eyes darted to the kitchen door where Evelyn's shadow loomed. Evelyn's glare silenced Clara's warmth and Kayla's heart sank. Even kindness here came with conditions. She set the tray down her braids, brushing her shoulders, and caught her reflection in a silver picture. Dark eyes, high cheekbones, a face that carried her grandmother's strength. She wasn't here to shrink. She'd spent months planning this reunion, blending her gula recipes with the Caldwell's favorites, hoping to weave herself into their story. But Evelyn's words echoed subtlety. Matters. A code for conformity, for erasing the parts of Kayla that didn't fit their mold. Another guest entered, a distant uncle whose name she couldn't recall. He took a glass of sweet tea from her tray, his eyes lingering on her braids before muttering, "Quite the spread." The compliment felt hollow. His gaze, a mirror of Evelyn's judgment. Kayla nodded her smile, practiced, and returned to the kitchen, where the stew's aroma wrapped around her like a hug. She checked her phone, no new messages from Sebastian. The ache of his absence grew, but she whispered to herself, "Just get through today." The rain thickened its patter, steady drum against the mansion's roof, and more voices filled the foyer. Kayla tied her braids back, the beads clicking softly, a reminder of who she was. She'd faced the Caldwells, their whispers, their stares, with the same strength that had carried her ancestors through harder storms. But as Evelyn's rosewater scent lingered in the air, a bee chill settled in Kayla's bones. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a battlefield. And she was unarmed. Her only shield, the love she carried for Sebastian, and the heritage woven into every beat of her hair. Kayla's fingers tightened around the dish towel, the coarse fabric grounding her as Evelyn's voice echoed from the foyer, summoning guests with a honeyed warmth that never reached her eyes. The kitchen, still fragrant with okra stew and cornbread, felt like a shrinking sanctuary, its warmth no match for the chill of Evelyn's parting words. Subtlety matters. Kayla's braids tied back brushed her neck, their beads a soft clink against the rising hum of voices outside. She straightened her reflection in the silver picture, a fleeting reminder of her grandmother's unyielding spirit. The reunion was only beginning, and Sebastian's absence was a hollow ache, but she wouldn't falter. Not yet. Carrying a tray of sweet tea, Kayla stepped into the foyer, where the chandelier's golden light danced on polished marble. The relatives streamed in, shaking off rain-soaked coats, their laughter sharp and foreign. Her braids caught the glow, a vibrant contrast to the muted elegance of tailored suits and pastel dresses. She offered glasses, her smile practiced, but their responses were curt, eyes flicking to her hair. Before sliding away, Uncle Robert, a barrel-chested man with a ruddy face, took a glass and grunted, "You're Sebastian's wife, huh?" Kita unique addition. His tone dripped with condescension, and Kayla's jaw tightened, but she nodded, her voice steady. "Glad you could make it, sir." The words felt like ash, but she pressed on, weaving through the crowd. Clara, the cousin who'd briefly warmed to her in the kitchen, stood near the staircase, her eyes darting to Evelyn's silhouette in the dining room. Kayla offered her tea, hoping for an ally, but Clara's smile was thin, her whisper barely audible. "Thanks, but maybe keep a low profile today." The advice, laced with fear, stung worse than silence. Kayla's tray trembled, but she steadied it, her braids swaying. As she turned back to the kitchen, Evelyn's heels clicked behind her, a predator's rhythm. Kayla dear, we need more eyes, she called, her voice loud enough to draw eyes. Don't dawdle. The command was a performance, a reminder of Kayla's place. Kayla nodded, retreating to the kitchen where the clatter of pans drowned out the foyer's chatter. Alone, she leaned against the counter, the damp scent of rain-soaked air mingling with buttery cornbread. Her phone buzzed, Sebastian texting, "Flight delayed again. I'm so sorry. Love you." Okay, her fingers hovered, wanting to confess the weight of Evelyn's stares, but she typed instead, holding up, "Hurry back." She couldn't burden him, not now. The kitchen door creaked, and Evelyn entered, her rosewater perfume, a clawing invasion. She inspected a tray of shrimp and grits her lips, pursing. "This is far too spicy for our tastes." She sighed as if Kayla had committed a personal offense. "You should have consulted me." Kayla's pulse quickened, but she kept her tone even. "It's a gula recipe. Evelyn A. Tradition from my family." "I thought it had honor." Savannah Evelyn's eyes snapped to hers, cold and unyielding. "Tradition here is ours, not yours." The words were a blade slicing through Kayla's resolve. She wanted to snap back to defend the legacy woven into every dish, but Evelyn's gaze shifted to her braids, a flicker of disdain crossing her face. "And that hair," she added almost to herself. "It's so loud." Her fingers brushed a pair of ornate silver scissors on the counter, their glint catching Kayla's eye, an heirloom she'd heard used for family ceremonies. The moment passed, but a chill settled in Kayla's bones. Evelyn's touch on the prod, scissors lingering like a threat. She escaped to the dining hall, setting out platters as the crowd grew louder. Overhearing Clara's voice, she paused, hidden by a velvet curtain. "She doesn't fit here." "Does she?" Clara whispered to another cousin, her tone heavy with pity. "Evelyn's never going to let her in." The words carved a hollow in Kayla's chest, her hands trembling as she adjusted a napkin. She wasn't invisible. She was a wound, noticed only to be prodded. Her braids felt heavier, their beads a lifeline to a strength she feared was slipping. The rain softened to a drizzle, but the mansion's air grew denser, charged with unspoken judgments. Kayla returned to the kitchen, tying her braids tighter, the beads clicking like a prayer. She'd planned this reunion for months, blending her heritage with the Caldwells to build a bridge. But every step felt like crossing a minefield. Evelyn's voice rang out again, calling guests to the dining room for the formal toast. Kayla's phone stayed silent. No new word from Sebastian, she whispered to herself. "Just get through today." Her voice barely audible over the clink of glasses beyond the door. Stepping into the hall, she caught Evelyn's silhouette near the dining table, the heirloom scissors now prominently displayed for the upcoming ribbon-cutting ceremony. Evelyn's eyes met hers, sharp and unyielding, a predator, sizing up prey. Kayla's heart thudded, but she lifted her chin, her braids a defiant crown. She was here for Sebastian, for the life they'd built, and no amount of whispers or stares would break her. But as Evelyn's gaze lingered, a shadow of something darker, something cruel flickered in her eyes, and Kayla knew this day was far from over. Kayla's pulse hammered as Evelyn's gaze pinned her, a predator's stare slicing through the dining hall's golden haze. The heirloom scissors gleamed on the mahogany table, their silver edges catching the chandelier's light like a warning. Kayla lifted her chin, her braids swaying their beads, a soft clink against the rising tide of voices. The Caldwell reunion was shifting into its formal rhythm, and she refused to let Evelyn's shadow break her. Sebastian's absence was a raw ache, but she'd carry this moment for them both. Her love, a shield against the whispers that still echoed from the foyer. The dining room thrummed with the clatter of silverware and the low hum of relatives settling into their seats. Kayla slipped to the buffet, her hands steady, as she arranged a platter of collard greens, their earthy scent mingling with the wax of flickering candles. Her braids framed her face, a vibrant defiance against the room's muted elegance. Pastel dresses, tailored suits, and faces that watched her with guarded curiosity. She was a flame in their monochrome world, and they couldn't look away. Evelyn stood at the table's head, her silver blonde chignon flawless, her voice ringing out as she raised a crystal glass. To Caldwell heritage, she declared, her tone rich with pride, a legacy of strength and tradition. Her eyes swept the room, landing on Kayla with a flicker of disdain. We cherish our traditions. Unlike some newcomers, the words were a dart cloaked in civility, and the room stilled, relatives shifting uncomfortably. Kayla's fingers tightened on the platter, but she kept her expression serene, her grandmother's voice whispering in her mind, "Hold your head high, child." She moved silently, refilling glasses, her braids brushing her shoulders. Aunt Lillian, a wiry woman in her 72nd with kind eyes, leaned forward as Kayla passed this stew's divine child. She whispered, her smile a rare warmth. Kayla nodded, gratitude flickering, but Evelyn's voice cut through like ice. "Kayla, dear, more." Wine for Mr. Thompson. The command was sharp, a public reminder of her role. Kayla complied, her steps measured, but Evelyn wasn't done. She leaned toward a cousin, her voice carrying her hair's quite the distraction, doesn't it? Hardly suits our aesthetic. The room seemed to tighten, the air thick with candle smoke and unspoken tension. Kayla's heart thudded Evelyn's words, a deliberate blade aimed at her identity. Her braids, woven with her grandmother's love, were no distraction. They were her. She paused, meeting Evelyn's gaze, and said, "It's part of who I am, Evelyn. I thought family embraced that." Her voice was calm, but a quiet defiance that rippled through the room. Clara, the cousin who'd whispered doubts earlier, blinked, a flicker of respect, crossing her face, and Lillian's lips curved, but Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her control fraying like a taut thread. The scissors on the table seemed to pulse their presence louder in Kayla's mind. They were, for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a Caldwell tradition to mark the reunion's peak. But Evelyn's earlier touch on them lingered, a shadow of intent. Kayla forced her focus back to the buffet, her hands arranging napkins with deliberate care. A cousin, emboldened by the wine, called out, "Kayla, tell us about these dishes. Your family's from here." The question felt genuine, a crack in the wall of judgment. She seized it, her voice soft but clear. "My grandmother was Gula, born on the islands. She taught me these recipes. Collards, grits, stew. They're stories, not just food." The room listened, some nodding, others leaning forward. Clara's eyes softened, and even Uncle Robert, the gruff patriarch, grunted approval. For a moment, Kayla felt the bridge she'd dreamed of building, her heritage, weaving into theirs. Evelyn's glass clinked sharply against the table, shattering the warmth. "Let's focus on the family's history, not hers," she said, her smile ablaze. The warm dismissal was a whip crack, snapping the room back to her command. Kayla's chest tightened, the fleeting connection snuffed out. She returned to her spot, near the buffet, her braids a heavy crown, their beads catching the light like defiant stars. The rain tapped the windows, a steady rhythm that matched her pulse, urging her to hold fast. Clara leaned toward Aunt Lillian, her whisper barely audible. "She's trying so hard. Evelyn's too harsh." The words were a lifeline, but they couldn't erase the weight of Evelyn's stare, now fixed on Kayla with a cold intensity. The matriarch's fingers brushed the scissors again, a fleeting gesture that sent a shiver down Kayla's spine. She wanted to text Sebastian to beg him to hurry, but her phone was in the kitchen, and Evelyn's presence was a cage. The dining hall buzzed as Evelyn announced the ribbon-cutting ceremony, her voice saccharine. "Kayla, you'll assist me," she said, her eyes glinting with something darker than triumph. "Let's make this memorable." The words were a trap, their weight sinking into Kayla's bones. She knotted her throat tight, her braids swaying as she stepped forward. Scissors gleamed their edges, a promise of something cruel. And the room watched, oblivious to the storm gathering in Evelyn's gaze. Kayla's heart roared, but she held her ground, her grandmother's strength, a whisper in her soul. You are enough. The ceremony loomed, and with it a reckoning she couldn't yet name. Evelyn's command hung like a guillotine, her words. Let's make this memorable. A velvet-wrapped threat that coiled around Kayla's throat. The dining room's chandelier cast a fractured glow, its light glinting off the heirloom scissors on the mahogany table, their silver edges sharp. As Evelyn's gazed, Kayla stood at the head of the table, a crimson ribbon clutched in her hands, her braids framing a face taut with unease. The rain's relentless drum beat against the windows, mirrored her pulse, a frantic rhythm, urging her to flee. But she held her ground, her grandmother's whisper, a lifeline. You are enough. The Caldwells watched, their faces a mosaic of curiosity and complicity, oblivious to the storm brewing in Evelyn's eyes. The ribbon-cutting ceremony, a Caldwell, tradition to seal the reunion's unity, felt like a stage for Evelyn's wrath. Kayla's braids swayed their beads, catching the candlelight, a defiant emblem of her heritage amidst the sea of pastel dresses and starched collars. She forced her hand steady, the ribbon silk cool against her skin. As Evelyn stepped beside her, her rosewater perfume, a cloying shroud. Hold it, taut, dear. Evelyn said, her voice saccharine, but her eyes were cold. A predator savoring the kill. Kayla knotted her throat tight, sensing the trap, but bound by duty and hope that she could still salvage this day. For Sebastian relatives leaned forward, glasses clinking their murmurs. A low hum. Clara, her earlier whisper of sympathy now silenced, watched with wide eyes, while Aunt Lillian's brow furrowed, sensing something amiss. Evelyn raised the scissors, their blades flashing, and began. This ribbon binds our legacy, our pride. Her words were for the crowd, but her gaze locked on Kayla, a silent accusation. You don't belong. Kayla met her eyes, her voice soft but firm. Unity is a beautiful thing, Evelyn. I'm honored to be part of it. The words, laced with grace, were a spark in the tinder of Evelyn's resentment. A guest emboldened by the wine called out. Well, said Kayla. The approval, fleeting but real, rippled through the room. Clara nodding faintly, Aunt Lillian's lips curving. Evelyn's face contorted her control, slipping like sand through her fingers. Kayla's poise, her refusal to shrink, was a direct challenge, and the matriarch's rage ignited. Poise doesn't make you a Caldwell. She snapped her voice. A whip crack that silenced the murmurs. Kayla's heart lurched, but she held steady, replying, Respect. Does Evelyn? I'm trying. The quiet defiance was aflame, and Evelyn's eyes blazed with fury. In a Teferi Balashan, swift, venomous motion, Evelyn seized the scissors and lunged not at the ribbon, but at Kayla's braids. The blade sliced, a sickening snip echoing in the stunned silence, and a thick section of Kayla's hair fell, beads clattering to the oak floor like shattered dreams. This is a Caldwell event, not your stage. Evelyn, hissed her voice, raw with triumph. The severed braids lay scattered, each strand a piece of Kayla's pride, her heritage torn away before the gasping crowd. The room froze, the rain's roar, the only sound amplifying the violation. Kayla stood, motionless, her hand clutching the fallen strands, their beads digging into her palm. Her eyes were wide, not with tears, but with a haunting defiance, a fire that refused to die. The pain was a tidal wave, crashing against her heart, not just the loss of her hair, but the stripping of her identity, her grandmother's legacy, this gilded cage of prejudice. Relatives gaped, Clara covering her mouth, Aunt Lillian shaking her head, but none spoke, their silence a heavier betrayal than Evelyn's act. Evelyn sat, her expression smug, the scissors glinting in her hand, believing she'd broken the intruder in their midst. The air thickened, candle smoke curling like ghosts, the damp scent of rain seeping through the windows. Kayla's knees trembled, but she bent slowly, picking up a single braid, its beads catching the light like defiant stars. Her movements were deliberate, a silent vow, you won't erase me. She straightened, meeting Evelyn's gaze, her eyes burning with a strength that made the matriarch's smirk falter. The room watched breathless, as Kayla's silence spoke louder than any scream, her dignity, a fortress against the cruelty. Clara's whisper broke the hush, barely audible to Aunt Lillian. She didn't deserve that. The words were a crack in the family's complicity, but they couldn't undo the violation. Kayla's voice, when it came, was a whisper, raw and resolute. You can't cut away who I am. The declaration hung a challenge to Evelyn's power, and the matriarch's fingers tightened on the scissors, her triumph souring. The dining room door creaked open and a figure stepped through, rain-soaked, and commanding Marcus, his tailored coat dripping, scanned the room. His eyes locking on Kayla's shorn hair, his voice cut through the silence, steady and unyielding. She's my sister. The words were a thunderclap, shattering the room's fragile stillness. Relatives turned mouths agape as Evelyn's face palled her, scissors clattering to the table. Kayla's breath caught the braid in her, and the lifeline as Marcus's gaze held hers. A promise of truths yet to unfold. The rain roared on, but a new storm was rising, one that would upend this house of pride. Marcus's words, she's my sister, hung like a lightning strike, electrifying the dining room's stunned silence. Kayla stood frozen, her severed braids clutched in her hand, her beads digging into her, palm like anchors against the chaos. The chandelier's glow cast jagged shadows, and the rain's relentless roar outside seemed to echo the storm breaking within her. Evelyn's scissors clattered to the mahogany table, her smugness dissolving as her pale face turned to Marcus, his rain-soaked coat dripping onto the polished floor. The Caldwells gaped, their glasses forgotten. As Kayla's eyes locked on this stranger, his face stirring a flicker of something deep, unplaceable. Beneath the fog of her pain, Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding, his dark eyes steady with a warmth that cut through the room's chill. I'm Marcus Thompson, he said, his voice a low, unyielding current. And Kayla's no, stranger to our family. The declaration was a blade slicing through Evelyn's carefully woven narrative. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound rising from her seat. This is absurd. Some con artist crashing our reunion. Her voice trembled, betraying the crack in her armor. But Marcus's gaze didn't waver, pinning her like a specimen. Under glass, Kayla's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the braids, their weight. A reminder of Evelyn's cruelty. Moments ago, Marcus's face high, cheekbones, a jawline that mirrored her own, felt like a half-remembered dream, stirring an ache she couldn't name. Her amnesia, a shadow from a childhood accident, had left her past a blank canvas. But his words painted colors she didn't know she'd lost. I don't remember, she whispered, her voice raw, barely audible over the rain's drumbeat. The admission was a wound laid bare, but her eyes never left his, searching for truth. Marcus softened, stepping closer, his coat's damp scent mingling with the candle smoke. You were 10, he said, his tone gentle but firm. A car accident took you from us. Amnesia stole your memories. But we never stopped looking. He gestured to the fallen braids on the floor, their beads glinting like scattered stars. Those braids. Mom taught you just like she taught me. They're ours. Kayla, the Words were a lifeline threading through the fog of her mind, and Kayla's heart lurched, a spark of recognition flaring despite the void. Evelyn's voice cut in shrill with desperation. Nonsense. She's my son's wife, nothing more. She clutched the table's edge, her knuckles white, but the room was shifting. Clara, her eyes wide, whispered to Aunt Lillian, "Could it be true?" Lillian's nod was subtle, her gaze on Kayla softening with guilt. The relatives' murmurs grew a tide, turning against Evelyn's reign. Marcus ignored her, his focus on Kayla, his voice a steady anchor. "You're not alone anymore," he said, and the promise wrapped around her like a shield. Kayla's knees trembled, the severed braids in her hand a tangible link to the heritage Evelyn had tried to erase. The violation still burned her hair, her grandmother's legacy torn away in front of this gilded crowd. But Marcus's presence was a counterforce, a spark of, I hope, amidst the wreckage. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions to unravel the burst life he claimed was hers, but her throat was tight, her mind a whirl of confusion and longing. The rain's rhythm seemed to slow its roar, a backdrop to the truth unfolding. Evelyn's laughter faltered her, eyes darting to the relatives seeking allies. "You believe this charade?" she demanded, but her voice cracked her authority fraying. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably, his earlier condescension gone. While Clara's gaze lingered on Kayla, a silent apology forming. Aunt Lillian spoke, her voice low but clear. "Let him speak. Evelyn, we've seen enough. Cruelty today." The words were a rebuke, and Evelyn's face palled, her grip on the table tightening. As the room's loyalty slipped, Marcus turned to Kayla, his eyes softening. "Your braids," he said, nodding to the strands she held. "They're part of our story. Mom used to say they carried our strength, our history." The mention of her mother sent a jolt through Kayla, a memory flickering a woman's hands, weaving her hair, laughter, warmth. It was faint like a star behind clouds, but it was there. She clutched the braids, tighter their beats, a pulse against her skin, grounding her in this moment of upheaval. The dining room door creaked again, and Marcus glanced back, his expression shifting to one of quiet resolve. "Our parents are here," he said, his voice steady. "They'll explain everything." Kayla's breath caught her eyes, darting to the foyer where the sound of footsteps echoed, deliberate and commanding. The relatives turned, their whispers rising as Evelyn's face drained of color, her scissors abandoned on the table. Kayla's heart pounded, the braids in her hand, a lifeline to a past she couldn't yet grasp, but one that was rushing toward her. She stood taller, her shorn hair framing a face that refused to break. Evelyn's act had meant to shatter her, to strip her of her identity. But Marcus's words were rebuilding it piece by piece. The rain roared on a symphony of chaos. But Kayla's gaze held Marcus's silent vow. She was ready to know who she was. The footsteps grew louder, and with them a truth that would shake this house to its foundations. The echo of footsteps in the foyer was a heartbeat, steady and commanding, pulling every eye. From Marcus's resolute face to the dining room's threshold, Kayla stood, rooted, her severed braids clutched like a talisman, their beads a faint pulse against her palm. The chandelier's light spilled into the hall, catching the rain-slick marble, and her breath caught as two figures emerged, elegant, unyielding their presence, a tide that shifted the room's gravity. Marcus's voice still ringing in her ears. "Our parents are here," was a promise now made flesh, and Kayla's heart roared, torn between confusion and a longing she couldn't name. The couple stepped forward, their silhouettes sharp against the foyer's glow. Richard Thompson, tall and broad-shouldered, his graying hair cropped close, carried an air of quiet authority, his dark eyes locking onto Kayla with a father's unspoken grief. Elaine beside him was a vision of grace, her braided hair mirroring the style Kayla's had been before Evelyn's scissors struck her face, a map of love and loss. "My baby Elaine," whispered her voice, trembling, a single tear tracing her cheek. The room held its breath, the rain's fading rhythm, a soft counterpoint to the counterpoint, truth unfolding. Marcus gestured to them, his voice steady. Richard and Elaine Thompson, our parents. He turned to Kayla, his eyes softening. You're their daughter. Kayla lost to us for 15 years. The words were a beacon piercing the fog of her amnesia. And Kayla's gaze darted to Elaine's braids, their familiar pattern, stirring a memory. A woman's hands, gentle and sure, weaving her hair under a sunlit porch. It was faint, but it was hers, and her chest tightened with the weight of Evelyn lurched to her feet, her chair scraping the oak floor. This is a fantasy. She snapped her voice, shrill with desperation. She's nobody, just my son's wife. Her hands gripped the table, knuckles white. But Richard's deep voice cut through, calm and unyielding. She's our daughter, stolen by a car accident and amnesia. You've insulted her heritage, her family. His words were a gavel, and the relatives murmured, their eyes shifting from Evelyn to the Thompsons, whose poise dwarfed the Caldwells, fading. Grandeur, Kayla's knees trembled, the severed braids in her hand. A bridge to the past. Elaine's presence promised, I don't remember, but I feel something. She stammered, her voice raw, her eyes fixed on Elaine's face, so like her own, yet etched. With years of searching, Elaine stepped closer, her silk dress rustling, and gently touched Kayla's shorn hair, her fingers trembling. These braids were our bond, she said, her voice thick with love. We'd sit for hours weaving stories into them. Our strength, our history. We'll make new ones together. Kayla's eyes stung, the weight of her lost years, crashing against the warmth of Elaine's touch. Clara's whisper to Aunt Lillian broke the hush. Evelyn went too far, she said, her voice laced with guilt. Lillian nodded, her gaze on Kayla. Now one of respect, not pity. The room's murmurs grew, a tide of doubt, eroding Evelyn's reign. Evelyn's face drained of color, her earlier smugness a ghost as she snapped. You expect us to believe this charade. But her voice cracked, her authority crumbling under the Thompsons' undeniable stature. Uncle Robert leaned back, his silence of betrayal, while Clara's eyes lingered on Kayla, a silent plea for forgiveness. Marcus stepped beside Kayla, his hand grazing her shoulder, a brother's reassurance. The Thompsons built an empire in Atlanta real estate philanthropy, influence that makes the Caldwells look small, he said, his tone matter of fact. But cutting, Kayla's one of us, always was. The revelation was a thunderclap, and Kayla's heart raced, the void of her amnesia filling with fragments, laughter, a porch, swing braids under her mother's hands. She clutched the severed strands tighter, their beads a lifeline to the heritage. Evelyn had tried to erase Elaine's eyes, met. Kayla's a mother's love, piercing the years. You were our light, she said, her voice breaking. We never stopped looking. Richard nodded, his gaze sweeping the room, a challenge to the Caldwell's pride. Your matriarch attacked our daughter's identity, he said, his tone even. But searing her braids carried our legacy, and you tried to cut it away. The words hung a mirror to Evelyn's cruelty. The relatives shifted their loyalty. Fracturing Kayla's voice when it came was a whisper, yet it carried. I don't know everything yet, she said, her eyes on Elaine, but I know I'm not nobody. The declaration was a spark igniting her resolve, and Elaine's tearful smile was a balm to the wound Evelyn's scissors had carved. Dining room's air thickened, the candlelight flickering as if bowing to the truth. Evelyn slumped, her hands trembling. The scissors, a forgotten relic of her failed triumph. Marcus glanced at the foyer, his voice steady. There's more to tell, Kayla, and we're here to help you remember. The promise was a vow, and Kayla nodded, her shorn hair framing a face, alight with purpose. The rain softened its pat rhythm, a gentle cadence, But the storm within the mansion was far from over. Ella's hand lingered on, Kayla's a tether to a past reclaimed. And as the relatives whispered their eyes on the Thompsons, Kayla knew the foundations of this house were shaking, ready to crack. Under the weight of her truth, Kayla's whisper, "I'm not nobody," still echoed a spark that set the main hall ablaze with whispers and shifting glances. She stood between Marcus and the Thompsons, her severed braids clutched like a battle standard, their beads glinting under the flickering candlelight. Elaine's hand lingered on hers, a mother's warmth anchoring her against the storm of Evelyn's fading reign. The Caldwells, once a monolith of pride, fractured under the weight of the Thompsons' presence, their elegance and authority a mirror to the Bud's pettiness of Evelyn's cruelty. The rain had softened to a murmur, but the tension in the hall was a live wire crackling with the promise of reckoning. Evelyn gripped the edge of the table, her face drained of color, her silver-blonde hair, usually a polished crown, seemed to unravel strand by strand, much like the control she was desperately trying to hold on to. "This is my family," she snapped, her voice rising like a clawed hand reaching for power. "I decide who belongs." Her eyes darted across the room, seeking allies among the relatives who had long stood behind her. But this time, the silence in the hall was different. It wasn't loyal. It was heavy, condemning. Clara, who had been quiet until now, took a step forward. Her voice trembled at first, but the words rang with clarity. "Not anymore. Evelyn, you've gone too far." The declaration cracked through the air like lightning against the Caldwell name. Aunt Lillian straightened in her chair, her eyes sharp with disappointment. "She's right," she said firmly. "You've shamed us all." Kayla's pulse thundered in her chest, her hand tightened around the severed braids. Evelyn had tried to destroy braids that carried her family's heritage. Evelyn's scissors had meant to strip her, to break her spirit. Instead, that act had reforged Kayla, sharpening her into something stronger. She stepped forward, the uneven strands of her cropped hair framing a face now lit with determination. "You tried to cut me down, Evelyn," she said, her voice steady, carrying across the hall. "But my roots are stronger than your hate." The words landed like thunder. Murmurs stilled. Eyes turned from Evelyn's trembling form to Kayla's unyielding stance. The room saw not a victim, but a woman reborn, forged in fire and truth. Richard Thompson moved to Kayla's side, his presence solid as stone. His deep voice carried the weight of a verdict. "You attacked our daughter's heritage," he said, his gaze sweeping the Caldwells. "The Thompsons built an empire on integrity, not prejudice. Your family could learn from her strength." The rebuke sliced through Evelyn like a blade. Her knuckles widened where she clung to the table. Uncle Robert, once a proud pillar of Caldwell tradition, looked away in silence, a surrender without words. Clara leaned toward a cousin and whispered, "She's one of them, a Thompson," but her voice carried a note of awe, not doubt. Elaine's hand slipped into Kayla's, her own braided hair gleaming like a mirror of the legacy Evelyn had tried to sever. "You're our light, Kayla," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "No one can dim that." The words soothed the raw wound left by Evelyn's scissors. Kayla's eyes burned not with tears of defeat, but with a fierce resolve. Her memory might still be fractured, but the Thompsons' presence filled the gaps with something stronger, a truth that anchored her. Laughter, braids, family. She was ready to reclaim it all. The hall's heavy door suddenly burst open, rain-soaked and breathless. Sebastian stood framed in the storm's dying light. His eyes fell on Kayla's shorn hair, and horror spread across his face. "Mother," he demanded, his voice raw, cutting through the stunned silence. "What have you done?" Evelyn stammered, her composure splintering. I was protecting our name." But Sebastian, was already moving past her, rushing to Kayla. He cupped her face in his hands, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here." Kayla leaned into his touch. The ache of his absence eased in that single moment. The severed braids she still held became not a symbol of loss, but of survival. Sebastian turned to face the room, his gaze sharp as steel. "Kayla is my wife, and she's more family than some of you have ever been." The words dropped like a gauntlet at Evelyn's feet. The relatives shifted uneasily. Silence, thick with reckoning. Kayla met his eyes, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm not just your wife, Sebastian. I'm Kayla Thompson, and I belong here." The vow carried not just to him but to everyone listening. Sebastian nodded, his hand closing firmly over hers, grounding her in their shared strength. Elaine stepped forward, her tone warm but commanding. "We'd like to host a gathering, bring our families together." Her gaze swept the Caldwells. "There's room for change, if you're willing." The offer lingered in the air like a challenge. Clara, guilt shadowing her features, nodded. Aunt Lillian's voice followed, low but unwavering. "It's time." The whispers in the hall shifted, no longer whispers of judgment, but of possibility. Evelyn slumped back, her trembling hands clutching at nothing. Her eyes flickered toward the abandoned scissors, a relic of her crusade. "You can't take my family," she whispered, but her words were hollow. Her authority, a ghost of what it once was. The Caldwells had seen her cruelty laid bare. Her power was gone. Kayla's gaze rested on her not with pity, but with clarity. Evelyn had not broken her. She had forged her. Sebastian squeezed Kayla's hand. His voice was low but steady. "We'll face this together." "Kayla." She nodded, clutching the braids that told her story. She was no longer broken. She was whole. The candles inside flickered low, their glow fading as Kayla stepped onto the veranda. The air outside was cool and fresh, washed clean by the retreating storm. She inhaled deeply, the night carrying the scent of jasmine, sweet and unyielding. The sky stretched wide over the savannah, painted in bold streaks of orange and pink. The colors caught the uneven edges of her shorn hair, no longer a mark of shame but a badge of survival. In her hand, the severed braids rattled softly, the beads clicking like quiet promises. Evelyn's scissors had failed. Her heritage, her identity, still lived within her. Beside her, Sebastian's hand was warm, steady. He had arrived too late to stop the cruelty, but he was here now. His presence, an anchor she could lean into. Marcus and the Thompsons followed close behind, a chorus of strength walking with her. The mansion loomed at her back, y grandeur humbled, its walls no longer a prison, but a witness to the truth that had been laid bare inside. Kayla touched her cropped hair, her fingers brushing the uneven strands. "This doesn't define me," she said softly, turning to Sebastian. Her voice was low, but resolute. "It's a reminder. I'm stronger than they thought." Sebastian's eyes softened, a mix of love and regret. "You're stronger than I ever knew." "Kayla," he murmured, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "I should have been here sooner." She shook her head gently. "You're here now. That's enough." Elaine joined them, her own braids catching the fire of the sunset. She held a small braid in her hand, beads glinting like stars. She pressed it into Kayla's palm. "We'll weave new ones," she said, her voice thick with hope. "Stories in every knot, just like we used to, under the Atlanta sun." A flicker of memory stirred inside Kayla's warm hands. Laughter, a porch swing rocking in summer heat. The amnesia still veiled much of her past, but Elaine's love broke through the fog, lighting a path home. Tears pricked her eyes, but her smile was sure. "I'd like that." "Mom?" The word felt fragile, like a bridge, rebuilt plank by plank, but it held. Clara stepped hesitantly onto the veranda, her face pale with guilt. "Kayla," she began, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I should have spoken up. I should have stopped her. I was wrong. Kayla's gaze held steady, kind, but unwavering. It's a start, Clara, and that matters. Aunt Lillian followed, her wiry frame softened by remorse. You've shown us what family really means. Child, she said warmly, we've got a lot to learn. Their words fell like seeds in soil fragile, but hopeful. Evelyn's cruelty had left ruins, but in the ruins, new roots were forming. Richard stood tall beside Marcus, his voice carrying across the veranda like a call to action. The gathering we offered, let it be a beginning, a chance for our families to build something better. Sebastian's jaw tightened, resolve sharpening his features. My family has work to do, starting with me. We'll be there. Mr. Thompson. The promise hung in the cooling air, a vow to bridge the chasm Evelyn had carved. Clara managed a small smile, faint but real. Through the dining room window, Evelyn's silhouette was visible. She sat alone, her head bowed. The scissors lay abandoned before her, mute testimony to a failed crusade. She had fought to protect her pride, but in doing so, had lost the loyalty of her family. The silence surrounding her was louder than any defense. Kayla felt no pity, only clarity. Evelyn had tried to erase her, but instead had forged a woman who knew her worth. A matriarch dethroned by her own hand. Kayla turned her eyes to the horizon. The sun was setting, but for her, something new was rising. She would stay with Sebastian. Their love was a foundation, but she would also reclaim the stories of her bloodline. Atlanta waited the songs, the braids, the heritage that was hers to carry forward. I'm ready to know who I am, she said quietly. Elaine's nod, tearful and proud, was a mother's blessing. Marcus's grin shone with brotherly pride. You're already her. Kayla, the rest is just catching up. The veranda boards creaked beneath their feet, a rhythm like the heartbeat of a new beginning. Richard's voice, steady and deep, carried across the hush. You are our daughter, always. The words stitched past to present, filling the gaps amnesia had left. Inside, relatives began to drift onto the veranda, their faces cautious but open, drawn toward the light of change. Clara's whisper reached a cousin. She's a Thompson, but she's one of us too. A fragile bridge, but a bridge nonetheless. Kayla stood between Sebastian and Elaine, their hands clasped, Marcus and Richard flanking them. The sunset bathed them in golden light, painting a promise of tomorrows where heritage and love could stand side by side. Her cropped hair stirred in the evening breeze, no longer a wound but a symbol. Roots no blade could sever. The scent of jasmine wrapped around them, steady and sweet. And Kayla's heart swelled not with pain, but with possibility. The mansion behind her was no longer a cage. It was simply a witness. Its walls would echo with the truth she had claimed, not the lies Evelyn had guarded. Kayla lifted her face to the horizon. Stars, piercing the twilight above. We'll build something new together, she said softly. The words were more than a promise to her family. They were a vow to herself. A woman forged in fire, a daughter of heritage reclaimed, and a light that no storm, no blade, and no prejudice could ever extinguish.